This is The Extra Point, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast, sponsored by your Phoenix Suns.
All right, time to talk a little baseball. Our next guest is an award-winning veteran national MLB writer who's been a contributor to the New York Times, national baseball columnist at Bleacher Report, CBSSports.com. He's covered baseball extensively for the Los Angeles Times, the St. Paul Pioneer Press. He's been honored several times as one of the top baseball writers in the country by the Associated Press sports editors, and his work has been cited in the Best American Sports Writings books, which I have the whole collection of, and that's one of my favorite things to get during the holiday season. My wife, I won't throw any of them out. So I'm very excited to talk to Scott Miller, who joins us now on the Extra Point podcast and the Extra Point television show. Scott, how are you today, and are you watching any day baseball as we catch you here midweek?
How are you, Mark? Very nice to be with you. And yeah, I'm never far away. I actually don't have the TV on this afternoon, but I'm looking at the scores, watching the Diamondbacks, Mets, seeing the Dodgers, Padres, and Yankee Stadium a little bit later, Texas and Boston. Even if depending on whether I have TV on, radio on, off, whatever, I'm never too far away. I'm usually plugged in one way or another.
Well, you're a good guy then to write a book about baseball. I think that was a good idea. So what went from, as you're turning stories every day and you're in clubhouses and you're building sources and then putting all of this into your book, Skipper, how did this all come together?
Over the last few years, and this was about a 3-year project. So say in the year or so leading up to that, a lot of it's just the conversations we all have around ballparks. And there's so much talk today. Obviously, analytics has come into baseball like a freight train, going back to the Moneyball days. But as things have evolved and changed and we've gotten into our current era, there's so many conversations about, what do managers even do anymore? Are they valuable anymore? They're more middle managers because the baseball operations department is telling most of them what to do. And that's last part, by the way, is I'd say false. Yes, they get input from baseball operations department. Yes, there are strong suggestions, but to call them middle managers, I get why people do that. But, front offices are bigger now. It used to just be the general manager. Now you got a whole baseball operations department. But still, when the game starts, and even before the game, in the clubhouse, somebody needs to run the ship. It's the players look to somebody for leadership. When the game starts, strategy, whatever it is, managers are still important, as the book title says, Skipper, Why Baseball Managers Still Matter and Always Will. It's just different. The job that Torey Lovullo is doing today in Arizona, even though it's named manager, it's different than the job Buck Showalter was doing with the expansion Diamondbacks in the late 90s. Even though they hold the same title, the job has just changed. Some similarities remain, but there are a lot of things, a lot of responsibilities now that managers have that they didn't used to.
If you were going to post a job title to be a Major League Baseball manager, and I guess let people apply, what sort of characteristics, what would you put down on the job title if you were to post it for a Major League manager here now in 2025 versus a Buck Showalter when the Diamondbacks were launched in 1998, and maybe even say Earl Weaver back in the 70s and the 80s? How has the job title changed, and what are the characteristics?
Well, if you're posting it today, leadership skills are a necessity, and they always have been, even in the Earl Weaver days. I put communication skills in there. That's something that's different. Today's managers have to communicate with their players because modern players want to know what's going on. In the old days, Earl Weaver, Sparky Anderson, they didn't talk to a lot of their players before the game. They'd talk if they needed to, but they didn't really worry about it. Bruce Bochy told me during one of our many conversations for this book, because he spans those eras, right? And Bochy told me one thing that's different today is It used to be, as a manager, you tell a player what to do. That was it. Today, you need to not tell a player what to do, but also explain why I need this done, or explain, if you do this, the benefits to whatever, the team, to yourself as a player. Players want more information now, and it used to be the authoritarian type of job where whether it was a baseball manager, football coach, a basketball coach, or even a leader of a company, hey, what he said goes. Hey, don't even ask questions. He said to do this. We need to do it. And it's different today. Generations have changed. The younger people are different. So I'd say, modern manager, leadership skills, communication skills, obviously strategy, but strategy, that might have been the number one thing if you were listing a job posting for a manager back in 1977 or 78. Today, strategy, surprisingly enough, for some people, is a little further down the list.
That's super interesting. And I would say, watching Torey Lovello and the Diamondbacks, I mean, that's the team I watched the most. Communication is what has won him Manager of the Year and allowed him to keep his job and get his team to the World Series in 2023. I mean, he's accountable every single night for what happens, whether it's his fault or not. That seems like that's a pretty big job. Whether you're just the press secretary sometimes or not, having to own what happened on the field. That seems like that's a big thing in the organization, and being able to spin it forward tomorrow and show up with hope to the ballpark.
No doubt. And, trust factors in there too. I talked to, chapter 1 features a lot of Aaron Boone managing the Yankees. And I talked to Brian Cashman. Cashman was telling me, you need a manager. I need a guy I can trust, because the season's so long and there's so many changes. Things change on a dime. And I mentioned trust because not just with the players, but baseball operations is so involved now with the manager. I mean, every organization, the manager is going to meet with the baseball operations folks before the game. There'll be some suggestions given. As Dave Roberts in Los Angeles says, it's a collaborative job. That's the word he uses. Collaborative, meaning working with the baseball operations, not working alone. And so what happens is, where the trust is concerned, that I mentioned, Cashman was talking about with Aaron Boone. Before the game, the manager meets with the media. After the game, the manager meets with the media. Whatever happens, the front office guys don't go talk to the media. And if the front office, one of the baseball analysts had a great suggestion, we need to do this tonight, whatever it is, say, I want to pull the starting pitcher after the 4th inning because I don't think this matchup tonight is good. And plus he threw X number of pitches last start. So let's pull him after the 4th inning, go to the bullpen. Well, if that works, great. If it doesn't work, you're not going to hear the manager post game say, well, it was a tough game tonight. Roy up in the baseball analytics department.
It's Roy's fault.
It's a suggestion. And so I pulled the pitcher after the 4th inning and it didn't work out. The manager takes all of the heat, all of the bullets. And that goes back to the trust. And Cashman's talking about Aaron Boone, but it's with everybody. The front office has to have somebody they can trust because there's a lot of stuff that happens. And the manager basically is the face and voice of the organization. And that's just how it is.
So I love asking questions here, and you'll go to Boach, you'll go to Aaron Boone, you'll go to Dave Roberts. So I would like to hear at some point, just kind of list of all the guys that you have talked to in order. But I do want to know, kind of one of the questions I have after you said that is, if a manager is not on the hot seat or kind of drawing the ire of the fan base at some point in the season, is he not doing his job correctly?
Probably not, because you're right. It especially baseball managers, even more than basketball coaches, or football coaches, it seems, anecdotal evidence. And to me, the reason I think that's so is because, baseball is such an accessible game. It can be understood at its most basic level by just about anybody. So anybody that watches a baseball game, it doesn't take long to think, well, I'm an expert on this. I know what's going on. And it doesn't matter if maybe that person that watches the few games thinks he knows a lot. It doesn't matter if he doesn't understand or even pay attention to, okay, there's a reason the starting pitcher threw this pitch right now. And then the next pitch plays off of that pitch on location, whatever the pitch selection is. I just threw a fastball. Now I'm going to throw him a curve. I'm going to change speeds. Fastball is 98. I want to throw a 78-mile-an-hour curve, 20-mile-an-hour difference. That's important to try to get a hitter out, changing speeds. People might not have any idea what that is or why that happens, but they understand it. Even those that understand it on the most basic level are going to be like, man, that manager blew. He brought in this reliever, and the reliever just gave up 5 runs, and this manager's an idiot. And, I always maintain, I've got, there's certain managers you might kind of roll your eyes at and think, I don't know about this guy if he's very good. But even those managers, you have to understand, they know way more about their team inside that clubhouse and who can do what job than those of us on the outside do. So they make moves. It doesn't always work out, but there's a level of competence, even in the worst managers, there has to be.
No, absolutely. And we've seen a lot. Having been here since '06, we've seen some swings for the fences, some misses. We've seen Kirk Gibson be the manager of the year, and that all come unraveled. But Bob Melvin, you talked to him in your book. It was fun reading about him. Take us through the list of guys that you actually got to sit down with, and what's maybe the thing that binds them all together, leading a baseball team.
Boy, I probably talked to close to 200 people for the book, between managers, players, and executives, both active and retired. But yeah, in terms of managers, pretty much you name a manager, he's probably included somewhere. I sat down with Dusty Baker a couple of times, with Terry Francona, Bruce Bochy, Brian Snitker in Atlanta, on and on and on. I'm trying to think right now.
I like to read about Art Howe. I'm a big Astros guy growing up in Houston, and the Moneyball A's. I was covering sports in Medford, Oregon, when their win streak, and that's still one of the most stunning sports moments. I think Art Howe might be one of the best. I don't know. I guess Billy Beane gets all the credit, but Art Howe, the way they won, it still blows me away.
It's amazing. Yeah. And I talked to Art Howe, and I talked to Billy Beane, because part of the book, I come up through the years. It starts in the late 1970s for a reason. Because some of the guys we just talked about, Earl Weaver and Sparky Anderson, Billy Martin, guys that ruled with an iron fist. But also in the late 70s is when the first very rudimentary computers were available to the public. And obviously, we've all grown up with computers now. That's what's changed baseball as well as the rest of life. So I kind of paralleled the growth of computers with managing from the late 1970s on. And it's kind of a look at what the job was like then, what it's like today, why we got from then to now, and how we got from then to now. And the why and the how, we go through the years. And the Moneyball era certainly changed the job of a manager. And Art Howe, by the way, Moneyball was a fascinating book and a really interesting movie. But man, in the movie, it was character assassination. Art Howe's one of the nicest men ever. And they made him really look like a jerk in the movie. But, Billy Beane was great. He was reflective today, looking back on the Moneyball era and some of the things he did then, some of the things maybe he tried to ramrod through too much and maybe should have had a better bedside manner. And then when we go up through 2011, 2012, that's another pivotal changing point in baseball, because that's when Chicago White Sox hired Robin Ventura, who had no managerial experience, and St. Louis Cardinals replaced Tony La Russa with Mike Matheny. Same thing. It was his entry-level job as a manager. Before then, you couldn't have an entry, major league manager. You had to, like the players, you had to have experience in the minor leagues. And that all changed in 2012 or so. And so then, we get into, why that happened and how that happened. But, yeah, back to your question, Dave Roberts, I should have mentioned him immediately. I spent a whole chapter on Dave Roberts. I shadowed him for 4 or 5 days and wanted to really dig into what it's like life for a modern major league manager. The players need him. He's got meetings with the baseball analytics office every day. The marketing department is pulling at you. Hey, we need you to speak at a statue dedication ceremony. The media relations point, we need this and that interview. And by the way, if the Baltimore Orioles marketing department would have gone to Earl Weaver in 1978 and said, we need you to speak at a statue dedication ceremony, Earl would have probably used a few words we can't use here and declined.
Yes, I do wish I could have interviewed Earl Weaver. I wish I could have just sat in a scrum, even if he would have yelled at me, because I probably wouldn't have finished the question out of fear. That would have been one for the bucket list. Who was the guy like that you sat down with that kind of made you sit up in your chair a little bit, make sure you were on your P's and Q's, and was there any surprises in doing your interviews here?
It was a fun project from the standpoint of I had done a story on Dusty Baker for the New York Times where I went to his home in Sacramento, and the story was on his family has a wine label. So I talked to Dusty about his wine business and spent some time. He literally has a vineyard in his backyard in Sacramento. And I spent one morning walking through the vineyard with him. And then that story's for the New York Times. And I ended up using a little bit of it for the book, but I doubled back to Dusty for a separate interview specifically for this book. And, Dusty, Jim Leland, they're both what I call like baseball philosophers. I mean, they have so much wisdom, and, it's always a kick talking to both of them. I always use the line, I use it in my personal life. My wife laughs. Jim Leland, among his many, many examples of the philosophical side of Jim Leland, he, when we talk about, look, you can't worry about yesterday. That's gone. Let's think about today and what we need to do to get through today and get through tomorrow. We all kind of follow that, I think, to some degree in our lives. Well, as far as, look, yesterday's gone. You can't worry about it. Jim Leland's very simple expression is, you can't chew yesterday's breakfast. And I love that. And like I said, I've stole that. I use that from him. I mean, it's true. But, it was nice. I talked to Craig Counsell for a while. We sat down for 30 minutes during the baseball winter meetings a couple of years ago. We talked about, as you know, he left the Brewers for the Cubs, signed a record-setting 8-year or a 5-year, $40 million deal, $8 million a year. Talked a little bit to Craig about managing in general, about managers being underpaid and how that all works. I went back and visited Jim Tracy. I sat at his home outside of Cincinnati. Tracy, I always enjoyed. He's not the household name of a Dusty or a Bruce Bochy, but he had great success managing the Dodgers for a few years in the early 2000s. And then right after Moneyball started in 02, 03, it was Paul DePodesta, Billy Beane's right-hand man, was named as the Dodgers general manager. And he immediately went to work on analytics. And his first full year there, Dodgers lost 90 games. Roster got messed up. Tracy left. So Tracy ran into analytics really early there. And then a few years later, he's managing the Rockies, and the Rockies did some things. And he ended up at the end of the year, he had 1 year left on his contract and $1 million. And he just walked away. He said, wow, I'm not dealing with this. So Tracy ran into analytics twice. So I wanted to, I visited him and like I said, outside his home in Cincinnati to, talk to him about all of those experiences. I sat down with Bob Boone, the old all-star catcher for the Phillies and California Angels, Bob and Sue, who are Aaron's parents. And I talked to Bob about his experiences managing Cincinnati and Kansas City back in the day. But also, I went to their house, and they were great. They were gracious. We watched a Yankees game while I was interviewing him. In other words, watching their son Aaron manage the Yankees. And so I kind of did the interview with that as a backdrop and, get into a little bit of that about Bob's reaction, about a couple things Aaron does on that particular night. Um, so, yeah, I tried to throw in a little bit of, different things that hopefully readers will appreciate, take readers behind the scenes in various areas and give them a look at some of these men that they don't always get a chance to see.
All right, so my Jim Tracy story is I got to travel with the Dimebacks a little bit, and he always wore a watch. He always had like a really nice watch on while he was managing. My Jim Leland story was we were trying to get him one-on-one for the pregame show, and the PR guy said, yeah, just go ask him. And so I went up and said, hey, Mr. Leland, my name is Mark McClune. I'd like to see if you have time for an interview for the pregame show. And he goes, yeah, sit down. And I was like, now?
Yeah, right.
And I think right. I can't remember, he was either just fresh off smoking a cigarette or was smoking while we were talking. I mean, I was like, well, I guess there's no time like the present here. But that was definitely one where you really had to know your stuff. And I got done. I was like, it was like an out of body experience. I was like, I didn't screw it up. But my question is, you see the old school guys, and they do look so stressed and yelling at the umpires, and maybe that was just part of the culture back then. It seems like now there's even more stress when you hear about Jim Tracy and analytics breathing down your neck. What's do you think we'll see managers like the lifespan? It just seems like this could chew you up and spit you out. What's a lifespan for a manager? How do they deal with the day-to-day stress?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a line in the book that managers are almost like presidents of the United States, in that if you look at a picture of them on their first day in office, and then you look at a picture as they're leaving office, it's amazing how much both presidents and baseball managers age while they're doing that job. And, the lifespan, I think it's a little short. I don't know, the most recent guy, I think the longest tenured guy in the last several years, Mike Scioscia, who managed the Angels for 19 years. You used to have, Tommy Lasorda managed the Dodgers for 20 some years, Walter Alston, 25 or 28 years in LA. I don't think we're going to see that again because of what you said. It's just the demands are different. When I talked to Craig Counsell, he said he was in Milwaukee still. He said, whenever I see the Green Bay Packers coach or the Milwaukee Bucks coach, and we compare notes, they cannot believe how much time we have to spend with the media in baseball, press conference before the game, after the game. And that kind of thing, I think, wears out managers. But also, there's so much of that now. You know how it is. Eventually, people just need a different voice. You can only hear one voice for so long before maybe the baseball department with a club or the fan base or somebody is like, oh, geez, we're sick of this guy. So I think they do get chewed up and spit out, more now. I don't think the longevity, we're not going to see another guy managing 25 years in one spot. When I talked to Dave Roberts about this, he said if he could manage the Dodgers 10 or 15 years, he thought it'd be perfect. And he just finished, I think last year was his 9th year, and he signed the extension. His current extension would put him up to about 14 years with the Dodgers, assuming he finishes it. But I think even for very successful managers, I think that's about the time frame we'll see now versus 25 or 30 years.
No, and I'm interested more about your conversations with Bruce Bochy, just because of his success in San Francisco, and then you bring in a guy like Gabe Kapler, who you'd think would be more new age and more, where the analytics would be able to translate more to the field. What's a day-to-day look like for Bruce Bochy, and how has he been able to, parlay, have the success, San Diego, San Francisco, and then I guess we should have all seen that the Rangers would win one World Series. I wonder if he'll keep up the even year trend.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a couple things with Boch. One, he's just a genius at running a bullpen. And, way back when, 100 years ago, when I covered the Minnesota Twins, Tom Kelly was the manager. And I was a new guy. And Tom Kelly was one of those gruff old school managers where if you asked the wrong question, man, he was going to bite your head off. So I would think and try to come up with the best questions. And every now and then, he could tell I was doing some homework, but it was an awkward question or it was like I was trying too hard. And every now and then he'd shake his head, he'd say, Scotty, it all comes down to pitching. That's all it is. It's been that way for 100 years.
That could be
If
the
we
one-line
pitch-
book.
Yeah. If we pitch better than the other guys, we're going to win. If we don't, we're not. And that's the way it's always going to be. And I bring that up because back to Bochy, he's a genius on pitching. And that's one reason he's had such success. Knowing when to use relievers, how much to get out of them, starters. He just, makes sense. A former catcher. He has plenty of knowledge in that area. I think the other thing, to me, him and Terry Francona, the secret sauce is they've never forgotten how difficult the game is and how hard it is to play. There are a lot of managers that will tell you that, but then they don't have the patience with a couple of their players. And the players immediately are like, man, you played the game. Internally they're thinking, you played the game. What are you screaming at me because I didn't, whatever, get the bunt down or get this down. This is a hard game, and you've forgotten this already. Francona and Bochy never have, and they've got a nice knack of they'll be able to correct a player or teach a player with kind of a fatherly approach, and the player really appreciates it. Versus, they try to teach, but they have bad teaching methods, or they try to talk, but they have bad communication methods, or they try to work with a player and they've forgotten how difficult the game is. Bochy and Francona both are great at all of the above.
Do you have a favorite story that you get to tell in this book?
Oh, boy. There are a few of them. I can't remember all the exact details, so I'll gloss over this one. But Theo Epstein talked a lot about the Boston years, the Cubs years, the managers he had. But he was a young buck coming up with the Padres before he was like an intern in the media relations department. And it was late 90s, I want to say. And Theo was just dabbling in analytics, but not every team had analytics at that point. And Theo and maybe two other guys, young ones in the Padres front office, were dabbling. So Padres are playing up in Los Angeles, and Theo's on the trip. And Theo told me this in a very funny, self-deprecating way. And he said, yeah, this is kind of like the beginning of analytics. He said, I went into Bochy's office. Bruce Bochy was manager of the Padres after we had lost to the Dodgers, like on a Friday night. And I went in and I didn't read the room. He was ticked off. We had lost. It was a tough loss. And I asked him something about the lineup. And what about putting this guy here? And he said, Bochy looked at me, used a few F words, and said, you think you're so smart? You write out tomorrow's lineup. And Epstein at first said, he kind of took it with a grain of salt, but he then realized Bochy was serious. So he comes up with a lineup for tomorrow. So now we're to Saturday. Bochy uses the lineup. And I think it was Darren Dreifert that was pitching for the Dodgers. And Theo says, I'm just a kid. I'm down in the scout seats behind home plate. He said, lineup I came up with. Darren Dreifert's on the mound. First inning, 1, 2, 3. Second inning, 1, 2, 3. Third inning, 1, 2, 3. Fourth and fifth innings, 1, 2, 3. He said, we're like to the sixth inning, and this guy's got a perfect game. He said, and I'm just squirming and going lower and lower in my seat. He said, I'm looking over at our dugout, and Bochy's just over there glaring at me. And he said, the game changed when the bullpens got in. The Padres ended up winning in extra innings. But Epstein laughed about that. And I talked to Bochy about it. I said, do you remember that? He grinned. He said, yeah, I do. And there's another secret sauce of Bochy. He said, you know what? I don't care where the suggestions come from. If they're good suggestions and if we're all working together to try to get a win. At that point, he said, fine, give me a suggestion. I'll try it. I'll try anything. And he laughed. He said something about young Theo back in the day. And then Bochy paused and he grinned. He said, Larry Baer, who's the president, was at the time president of the San Francisco Giants. He's still high up in the Giants. He said, he gave me a lineup one time when he was in San Francisco. He said, we're playing at Oakland, and he forgot to put the DH in the lineup. So he said I had to fire him too.
So the manager can fire members of the front office. How does the I guess the responsibilities then get doled out? I mean, is if you are starting a club or if you're cleaning house, typically is it the GM manager hired together? The GM hires the manager. Like when push comes to shove here, who do you think has the most influence on whether or not on a team's success?
I think the day-to-day during the season, probably the manager. Obviously, the general manager or president of baseball operations is who puts the roster together. So he's got a key role because you have to have good players if you're going to win. Every manager will tell you, if you don't give me good players, I can't win. So there's a lot of a symbiotic relationship there, and they have to work together. Generally, obviously the general manager or president of baseball operations will hire the manager. Not always the case. In Detroit right now, Al Avila hired A.J. Hinch, but then the Tigers blew out Avila after a couple years, but they liked Hinch so much, he stayed on as manager, and then they hired somebody else to replace Al Avila. So in rare instances, the manager will outlast the GM or maybe rise to where he's got equal power in the organization. But, power-wise, there's no doubt still the president of baseball operations and general manager has the power, partly because they work so close with the owner. And as Sandy Alderson told me during this book, he's another executive that I spoke with at length, and he was kind of the godfather of Moneyball in Oakland before Billy Beane replaced him. And as Sandy told me, it's almost reached a point in the game where, like, the leader of the baseball operations department, president of baseball operations or GM, they're almost too close to the owner because their owners hire those guys. And then the owner and the baseball operations head are so close. Then what happens is when they hire the manager, they're looking for another guy similar to themselves. And so sometimes you get a team where the owner, the lead of baseball operations, and the manager, they're too alike, and there's not enough differences to have good spirited discussions saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't agree with it. I think you're wrong here. We need to maybe do it this way. And when you have some differences, sometimes that's, like they say, iron sharpens iron. And when you have some differences, maybe, that's, I think, when some of the good teams can rise as well, versus today in the analytics world, certain teams have too much of the same thing in those positions.
A couple more, and we'll let you get out of here. We're very appreciative of your time. We talked about communication, but with all the conversations you had, what do you feel like makes for an effective leader? And was there anybody in the book that wanted to talk to, was fascinated by any of your other conversations with other leaders in baseball?
I think to be an effective leader in today's world, you have to have good communication skills. I think, you've got to be smart in the baseball world. Obviously, you need to know baseball. You got to have a certain intelligence factor. It helps to have somewhat of a magnetic personality that will draw people to you, because that makes leadership easier. But you've got to have great communication skills, I think, to be a leader in today's world. And that's what so many of these teams are looking for. You talked about, it's one of Torey Lovello's big keys in Arizona. Dave Roberts, when I talked to him and shadowed him for those 4 or 5 days, he likes to, as he says, I like to touch every one of my players every day. And what he means by touch is at least have, even if it's a 3-second verbal exchange. So, Dave Roberts may start his day going through the cafeteria in the clubhouse around 2:00 when players are in there having lunch. He may go by, say hello to this guy, ask this guy about his wife, ask this guy about, how's your injury coming along, ask this guy this, and then who he doesn't get to, maybe on the field during batting practice. He makes the rounds. And he said, I just feel better about going into games when I've at least touched every person on my roster before the game. And I asked him, I said, you've had so much success in Los Angeles. Do you ever not feel good about a particular night or particular game? And he said, yeah. He said, the only times I really don't feel good going into a game is when, for whatever reason, I haven't touched everybody on my roster. Maybe I had an extra meeting or two that day. And so I missed talking to these 5 players over here. And he said, those nights, I don't feel great about going into the game. So I think that's a huge, huge factor that, I mentioned Tom Kelly. I had to ask the questions just so, or he may rip your head off. 30 teams today, a lot of it is the communication. I mean, all 30 managers today are nice guys. You don't have those old guys. And like you said, Mark, when you went to talk to Jim Leland and ask him for an interview, and you were worried he may, get cross with you, today's guys are going to, generally speaking, be very polite and nice, and you don't have to worry about that. And I think, that's, again, a mark of the world we live in today versus the one we used to live in.
No, for sure. Did you solve the age-old question of why baseball managers wear uniforms?
Tradition more than anything. It's the way it's always been done. I did ask Terry Francona about that. There's a couple paragraphs in the book about that. And Francona, I think, 68 now in his first season with Cincinnati Reds. I talked to him, say, 3 years ago. He might have been 65 or whatever. And I asked him, because Terry Francona, I mean, he pulls on his sliding shorts and then his baseball pants. And I asked him, and he laughed about it. He said, I was a player, then I was a coach, then I was a manager. It's what I've always done. He said, I asked him, I said, some people think like a 65-year-old guy dressed like that might look funny. And he said, I know there are probably people that laugh, but he said, it's what I've always done. And he said, I can tell you this, I'd rather go into my frickin' casket wearing a baseball uniform than a frickin' suit. I'll tell you that right now.
And Jim Leland wore spikes, which made it even more big league. That was very intimidating. You look down, he's wearing spikes, like he could go steal a base. Hey, one question kind of off topic because we're talking about it here about baseball, and I'd like to pick your brain, your expertise. A lot of arm injuries right now with the Diamondbacks in a Major League Baseball. And we were having a spirited discussion the other day about that the human body's not meant to throw 100 miles an hour. Do you have a thought there about why we have so many arm injuries these days?
Yeah, a couple. I agree with what you just said. There's no doubt about that. And the problem in today's game, and again, I'm not an anti-analytics guy. I praise analytics in certain parts of the book. I just think, there's good in analytics and there's bad, just like there's good and bad in a lot of things. And in today's analytic-led game, it's all about power. And to your point, the human body is not meant to throw that hard, but the way the game's changed, teams just collect as many hard throwers as they can, and they line them up and basically say, go get them, throw as hard as you can for as long as you can, and then we'll bring in the next guy. Pitching used to hear that phrase, add and subtract, meaning Greg Maddux is out there. He's going to throw his fastball, which wasn't much, say 90 miles an hour, and it wasn't max effort. He may have waited till the 4th inning, a key moment, or the 5th inning, guy on second, third, and whoever's batting, he may then increase his fastball from 90 to 92 or 93. He added some velocity, in other words, and then the next year might come up, he might throw something in the mid 80s, a curveball, that's subtracting velocity. He used to add and subtract. It wasn't, all the great pitchers didn't just throw as hard as they could every day. I mean, the fastball, you used to hear whoever it was, like a Bob Gibson or a Denny McClain or whomever, that sometimes their fastball in the first, second, third innings was pretty good, but then they kick it up a notch in the 4th and 5th innings, the second time around the order. Today, I don't think pitchers do that. They just throw as hard as they can. So that's certainly a big reason. I think with analytics, so much data today, you can measure the spin of a ball when you throw a curveball break, and players make money by how much they can spin the ball. That I think wrecks arms, but the temptation's there because the money's there, and I can tell you exactly how many RPMs your ball spins when you throw a curveball. So everybody's trying to spin the ball more. And lastly, I think the arm injuries start long before the major leagues. It goes back to travel ball and even little league, but especially travel ball. Guys are throwing too much at too young of an age, and by the time they reach the upper minors or the majors, some of these guys' arms are shot already.
No, I agree. I have 2 kids playing, and it's crazy to kind of see how hard guys are throwing at a young age. But I am very appreciative of your time. You spent a lot of time with us. Good luck with the book. Tell us where we can find the book, where we can find you, and are there any book signings planned for the greater Phoenix area, or should we just get you out here for a big series at Chase Field?
There you go. Right now, no book signings. I am doing a book signing. I'm eager to say it's going to be very cool. Cooperstown, Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown does an author series in the summer where a different author appears each month. So I'm going to be in Cooperstown June 12th, Thursday, June 12th, talking about the book and signing the book. And that'll be a lot of fun. Nothing, book signings, they tell me, aren't as big. Interviews like this, you can cover more ground. And so they don't send authors on big tours as much anymore, but I'm sure I'll get to Phoenix before too long. Books available pretty much as they say, wherever you can like to buy books. It should be on the shelves of Barnes & Noble or any of your favorite bookstores. The publication date is May 13th, Tuesday, May 13th. You can also get online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, all the places online where people get stuff. So many different places to get the book.
Well, this is funny. I'm actually going to be there June 12th as well, watching my son play baseball. So we're going to have to meet up in person. How's that sound?
Beautiful. That'd be great. Yeah, we're flying in like the 11th of June, and I think the thing's at 1:00 in the afternoon, they tell me, at the Hall of Fame. So yeah, say hello if you can. That'd be awesome.
Awesome. Well, hey, I will reach out. I really appreciate the time. Good luck with the book, and we'll see you at the ballpark, Abner Doubleday Field, maybe in Cooperstown very soon.
That sounds great. Mark, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate you having me on.
The Extra Point Podcast is a production of 3TV, CBS5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.